Every dollar you've ever touched is a lie. Not the paper itself, that's real enough, but the system behind it? That's a carefully constructed illusion. Right now, as you listen to this, there's a shadow version of the American dollar system operating in complete darkness. It's worth over $10 trillion. It's more powerful than the Federal Reserve. And it was accidentally created by the Soviet Union in 1957. The shadow dollar doesn't live in New York or Washington. It exists in London, Singapore, the Cayman Islands, anywhere but America. It's called the Eurodollar market, and it's the financial world's best-kept secret. Banks use it to move money beyond the reach of any government. Corporations use it to dodge regulations. Even today, Russian oligarchs and Chinese billionaires use it to evade sanctions that were supposed to cripple them. The Federal Reserve, the most powerful central bank in history, has no control over it whatsoever. This is the story of how fear created the world's largest unregulated financial market, and why every major economic crisis of the last 50 years traces back to this shadow system that most people don't even know exists. October 1956. Soviet tanks roll through Budapest, crushing the Hungarian Revolution. The world watches in horror as the Iron Curtain slams shut once again. But in Moscow's financial circles, a different kind of panic is spreading. Stalin is dead, but his paranoia lives on in the minds of Soviet economists. They're staring at a terrifying problem. The USSR holds millions of US dollars earned from grain exports and arms sales. These dollars are sitting in American banks, supposedly safe, but what if they're not? What if President Eisenhower decides to freeze Soviet assets as punishment for Hungary? What if America decides to weaponize the dollar system itself? The Soviets had watched this happen before. During the Suez Crisis, Britain had seen its dollar reserves threatened by American pressure. If it could happen to America's closest ally, it could certainly happen to America's greatest enemy. Soviet financial officials couldn't sleep at night, knowing their hard currency was trapped inside the American banking system. They needed a solution. They needed their dollars to be truly theirs, held outside of America's reach, beyond the jurisdiction of American courts and American politicians. They needed to create dollars that America couldn't control. The official story goes like this. The Eurodollar market emerged naturally as international trade expanded in the 1960s. Banks needed a way to handle dollar transactions outside the United States, so they developed offshore dollar accounts. It was a simple evolution of global finance, driven by the needs of multinational corporations and international trade. End of story. Except that's not what happened at all. The truth is far more deliberate, far more strategic, and far more dangerous. The Eurodollar market wasn't a natural evolution. It was a financial weapon designed by the Soviet Union to break free from American monetary control. And once that weapon was unleashed, it took on a life of its own, growing into a monster that even its creators couldn't have imagined. Today, this shadow dollar system processes more money in a single day than most countries see in a year. It operates completely outside the rules that govern regular banking. No deposit insurance, no reserve requirements, no oversight from the Federal Reserve. It's capitalism's Wild West, and it all started with Soviet paranoia in a basement office in Moscow. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because the Soviets didn't just dream up this plan and hope for the best. They had help. Unexpected help from the very heart of Western capitalism. In 1957, a small London bank called the Banque Commerciale pour l'Europe du Nord received a very unusual deposit. The bank's cable address was Eurobank, a detail that would later give this entire market its name. The deposit was in US dollars, but it wasn't coming from America. It was coming from Moscow. The Soviet Union had found the perfect loophole. European banks could hold and lend US dollars without being subject to American banking regulations. These weren't just any dollars. They were dollars that existed in a legal grey zone, beyond the reach of the Federal Reserve, beyond the reach of American courts, beyond the reach of American foreign policy. The London bankers who accepted this deposit probably thought they were just doing regular international business. They had no idea they were about to midwife the birth of a shadow financial system that would eventually dwarf the official banking system of every major economy on Earth. And this is where everything changed. Because once the Soviets proved it could be done, everyone wanted in. American banks saw European banks making money from dollar deposits and lending, and they wanted their piece of the action. European banks realized they could offer higher interest rates on these unregulated dollar accounts, attracting customers from around the world. Corporations discovered they could borrow millions without dealing with the strict requirements of American banking law. What started as a Soviet escape plan quickly became capitalism's favorite playground. By the 1960s, the Eurodollar market was exploding. Banks in London were lending dollars they had never seen to companies in countries that didn't use dollars for projects that would never touch American soil. The money existed purely as entries in ledger books, moving from account to account at the speed of a telex message. No physical dollars were involved. No American oversight applied. It was pure financial abstraction, and it was growing faster than anyone could track. The Federal Reserve watched this unfold with growing alarm. They were supposed to control the supply of dollars in the world economy, but suddenly there were dollars everywhere that they couldn't see, couldn't count, and couldn't regulate. But the real acceleration came in 1971, when President Nixon made a decision that would supercharge this shadow system beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Nixon closed the gold window, ending the convertibility of dollars to gold that had anchored the global economy since World War II. Suddenly, the dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith in the American government and economy. This should have made dollars more valuable and more tightly controlled. Instead, it did the opposite. With no gold backing to constrain dollar creation, and no requirement for foreign banks to convert their dollar holdings to gold, the Eurodollar market exploded like a financial supernova. Banks could create dollar-denominated loans and deposits almost at will. Oil-producing countries, flush with petrodollars from rising oil prices, poured billions into European banks rather than American ones. The shadow dollar system went from millions to billions to hundreds of billions almost overnight. American policymakers began to realize they had lost control of their own currency. The Fed could control the money supply within the United States, but they had no power over the dollars circulating in London, Paris, Singapore, or Hong Kong. They had accidentally created a parallel monetary system that operated by entirely different rules. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. in a dealing room in London's financial district. Traders in expensive suits are moving hundreds of millions of dollars between accounts that exist only in computer systems. These aren't American banks, so they don't follow American rules. They don't need to keep reserves with the Federal Reserve. They don't need to worry about deposit insurance limits. They don't need to report their transactions to American authorities. The money moves invisibly, instantly, and completely beyond the control of any single government. This is the Eurodollar market in action, and by the 1980s, it had become larger than the entire American banking system. Banks were lending dollars to Brazilian companies to build factories in China. Middle Eastern oil producers were depositing dollar profits in Caribbean banks owned by European holding companies. Soviet-era paranoia had created a financial Wild West where anything was possible and nothing was regulated. The numbers became staggering. In 1960, the entire Eurodollar market was worth about $1 billion. By 1980, it was worth over $500 billion. By 2000, it exceeded $5 trillion. Today, estimates put it at over $10 trillion, roughly half the size of the entire American economy, operating completely outside American law. Then came 2008, and the world discovered just how dangerous this shadow system had become. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, it wasn't just an American bank failure. It was a Eurodollar catastrophe that sent shockwaves through the global shadow banking system. Banks around the world suddenly refused to lend to each other because nobody knew who had exposure to what. The Federal Reserve, despite being the issuer of the world's reserve currency, couldn't see into the vast network of offshore dollar transactions that were freezing up. European banks that had borrowed billions in the Eurodollar market couldn't roll over their funding. Asian banks with dollar loan portfolios watched their access to short-term funding evaporate overnight. The supposedly all-powerful Federal Reserve had to set up emergency swap lines with dozens of foreign central banks, essentially begging them to help stabilize dollar markets that the Fed couldn't directly control. It was a humiliating admission. America's central bank didn't actually control the dollar system. The shadow system that began with Soviet paranoia in 1957 had become so large and so interconnected that its collapse would have destroyed the global economy. The tail was wagging the dog, and the dog didn't even know how big the tail had grown. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn, because the 2008 crisis taught the world's financial players an important lesson. The shadow dollar system was too big to fail, which meant it was also too big to regulate. Instead of shutting down this parallel monetary system, governments quietly decided to prop it up and let it grow even larger. Today, the Eurodollar market is bigger than ever, and it's being used for purposes that would make even those paranoid Soviet planners blush. Russian oligarchs move billions through offshore dollar accounts to evade sanctions. Chinese companies use Eurodollar financing to fund Belt and Road projects that the American government opposes. Cryptocurrency exchanges like Binance use the shadow banking system to move illicit funds faster than any regulator can track. The same system that was created to help the Soviets escape American financial control is now being used by everyone who wants to escape someone's financial control. Drug cartels, arms dealers, corrupt politicians, and tax evaders all have one thing in common. They love the shadow dollar system. It gives them access to the world's most stable and widely accepted currency, without any of the oversight that normally comes with using that currency. And this is where everything comes full circle, because the Federal Reserve, the institution that's supposed to control American monetary policy, is now trapped by the monster that Soviet paranoia created. Every time the Fed raises interest rates, it affects not just the American economy, but trillions of dollars in offshore lending that they can't directly see or control. When the Fed tries to tighten monetary policy, Eurodollar rates might move in the opposite direction, undermining American economic policy. When sanctions are imposed on countries like Russia or Iran, those countries simply access the shadow dollar system through intermediaries, making the sanctions largely ineffective. The Fed's own research admits this problem. In internal documents, they acknowledge that a massive offshore dollar system operates beyond their jurisdiction, creating economic conditions they can influence but not control. They've become prisoners of a system that was designed specifically to escape their authority. Recent estimates suggest that on any given day, more dollar-denominated transactions occur outside the United States than within it. The American currency has become a truly global currency, but America has lost the ability to govern how it's used. It's the ultimate irony. The dollar's success as a global reserve currency has created the conditions for its own liberation from American control. But the real impact isn't just financial, it's geopolitical. The shadow dollar system has fundamentally altered the balance of global power in ways that most people, including most policymakers, don't fully understand. When America imposes sanctions, targeted countries increasingly turn to the Eurodollar market to maintain access to dollar funding through third parties. When China wants to internationalize its economy without fully opening to American oversight, it uses offshore dollar markets as a stepping stone. When European companies want to trade with Iran despite American sanctions, they route transactions through the shadow banking system. The system that began as Soviet financial self-defense has evolved into a tool for resisting American financial hegemony more broadly. Every major power now maintains some form of access to the shadow dollar system, specifically to reduce their dependence on American-controlled financial institutions. The ultimate irony is that America's own currency has become the primary tool for escaping American influence. The more successful the dollar becomes as a global currency, the less control America has over how it's used. It's as if the United States built the world's most sophisticated prison, only to discover that the keys don't work, and the inmates have been coming and going as they please for decades. Today, as tensions rise between the United States and China, between Russia and the West, between Iran and the international community, the shadow dollar system has become the secret battleground where these conflicts actually play out. Politicians make speeches about sanctions and economic pressure, but the real action happens in the invisible world of offshore dollar transactions that no government fully controls. Cryptocurrency advocates talk about creating alternatives to the traditional financial system, not realizing that such an alternative already exists and has existed for over 60 years. It's been hiding in plain sight, processing trillions of dollars in transactions that escape the notice of regulators, tax collectors, and law enforcement agencies around the world. The shadow dollar isn't going anywhere. If anything, it's growing faster than ever as more countries and companies discover the advantages of operating beyond any single government's jurisdiction. What started as Soviet paranoia has become the foundation of a truly global financial system, one that serves the interests of anyone with enough money and sophistication to access it. The next time you hear about sanctions, trade wars, or monetary policy, remember this: the most important financial transactions in the world happen in a shadow system that was built by America's enemies, using America's own currency, specifically to escape America's control. And there's absolutely nothing the American government can do about it.